F1's V8 engine debate. Could a return boost the sport? Imagine a world where the roar of powerful engines reigns supreme again in Formula One. On a brisk February morning, during the flash of the F1 season unveiling at London's O2 Arena, a surprising shift occurred. In the midst of an F1 commission meeting, Red Bull's then team principal Christian Horner placed his smartphone on the table, and a familiar voice chimed in from the other end. Bernie Ecclestone, the former mastermind of F1. "Bring back V10s," he said, igniting a flurry of excitement. However, this enthusiasm quickly collided with the reality of indifference from F1's engine manufacturers during a pivotal meeting leading up to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Yet, FIA President Mohammed bin Sulayem remains optimistic about a comeback for the V8 engines. At a media briefing before the British Grand Prix in July, he championed a vision for a return to natural aspiration, slightly adjusting it in response to manufacturers' concerns following the Bahrain summit. Their feedback highlighted numerous issues with the V10s, especially regarding their relevance to road cars, and suggested that any new engine regulation would need to incorporate a degree of electrification to align with consumer technology advancements. This debate has been an ongoing one within the F1 paddock. Should the sport slavishly follow the trends of road vehicles, or instead adopt a more radical approach focused purely on sound and power, potentially alienating manufacturers? While many purists advocate for sheer raw performance, they also recognize the practical challenges. What about the teams dependent on manufacturers? Who would actually create these engines? Ben Sulayem's push for V8 engines comes with a silver lining. Many manufacturers still have V8 configurations in their engine lineups, making this shift more palatable. Additionally, the internal combustion engine is experiencing a renaissance, bolstered by fresh technological developments in a rapidly changing global marketplace. Historically, the auto industry's trajectory has leaned towards full electrification, largely driven by government policies. However, many consumers remain hesitant, not only due to the high costs associated with electric vehicles but also because of a nostalgic allegiance to the visceral experience offered by traditional engines. With the influx of affordable, state-subsidized vehicles from China, Western car manufacturers are increasingly on edge. Former Renault Group CEO Luca de Meo openly expressed this concern prior to his departure, acknowledging the growing challenges in the market. For internal combustion engines to thrive, especially if F1 shifts back to V8s, there would need to be clarity around size and levels of electrification. As it stands, the upcoming regulation for 2026 envisions a 50:50 split between internal combustion and electric power, a concept that has been contentious. The FIA is contemplating an evolution towards an 80:20 ratio, or even a 90:10 favoring internal combustion, which would likely be implemented after the current technical package wraps up, around 2030, though Ben Sulayem hinted it could happen sooner. "We need to do it soon," he remarked at Silverstone, emphasizing the need for a 3-year timeline to prepare, ideally by 2029. Ben Sulayem is also keen on significant cost reductions through standardizing essential components like gearboxes and hybrid systems. Back in 2008, former President Max Mosley attempted a similar task during the financial crisis but faced challenges when he left office, and his ideas lost momentum. Standardizing gearboxes, which have become quite costly to design and manufacture, may not necessarily hurt competition as their performance differences have diminished over time. The concern over a standardized tender process is reminiscent of past fears about McLaren Technologies supplying engine control units, which ultimately did not materialize into issues. The standardization of hybrid components, however, may prove more controversial among manufacturers. These systems tend to be less visible to spectators, but lowering their costs could facilitate acceptance. As Nicholas Tambatsis, FIA's single-seater director, articulated, there's an ongoing struggle between the need for cost reductions and the desire for technological freedom. The manufacturers proposed several cost-saving strategies during discussions about the 2026 regulations, focusing on simplification, he explained. However, the extent of cost-cutting achieved hasn't quite met everyone's expectations. Even as F1 enjoys commercial prosperity and popularity, we mustn't take that for granted. Managing costs has to remain a priority. Ben Sulayem's projection is that given many manufacturers already produce V8 engines for their consumer cars, shifting back could be commercially viable. He aims for a target reduction of over 50% in costs related to these engines. This could involve not just standardizing parts, but also advocating for less expensive materials. Despite initial support for the idea of aluminum pistons from engine manufacturers, they later backed away from that proposition. Another hurdle facing F1 as it aims for net zero emissions is the expensive sustainable fuel expected to be mandatory next year, which ranges from $275 to $300 per liter, reflecting both significant R&D investments and the energy-intensive production methods. The complexity of determining who will bear these costs, given each team's tailored fuel agreements, is bound to invite heated discussions, especially with Ben Sulayem's advocacy for a single fuel supplier. Fuel no longer differentiates performance as drastically as it once did, with stringent regulations guiding its chemical composition towards standard pump fuel levels, but brands still bank their narratives on performance. For instance, Shell has closely intertwined its V-Power brand identity with Ferrari. Would those partnerships survive if Ferrari were reduced to just another vehicle for brands like Shell? In the end, if the cost-cutting strategies that Ben Sulayem envisions come to fruition, the entire grid stands to gain, ultimately making the exact source of the power less significant. What's your take on the potential V8 revival? Do you see this as a necessary evolution for the sport, or is it a step backward? Stay tuned to uncover more about F1's journey, whether it's about addressing tire issues or other pivotal challenges. F1 Future Vision, V8 engines, Spec gearboxes, standard fuel. The future of Formula One is on the brink of transformation, as FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem argues that the current turbo-hybrid engines cannot sustain the sport for the long haul. His vision entails a significant overhaul of regulations that prioritizes cost efficiency and vehicle weight reduction. As we approach the upcoming cycle of regulations, with a new generation of power units expected to unleash greater electrical power in 2026, Ben Sulayem insists that the need for a dramatic shift has never been more pressing. He believes that F1 must embark on a new chapter that not only reduces entry costs for teams but also results in markedly lighter cars. Earlier discussions about reviving the V10 engine format have been set aside, following a manufacturers' summit in Bahrain where they expressed disinterest in this direction. However, Ben Sulayem is optimistic that the idea of adopting V8 engines by 2029 or 2030 could gain traction, in conjunction with a move towards more standardized components to significantly curb expenses. In an exclusive conversation with The Race, he shared, "The teams and power unit manufacturers now see that persisting with the existing engine is not viable. The complexity of the MGUH component has served its purpose, but the question remains, did it meet expectations? 3 years from now, I hope to see it as a relic marking 15 years since its introduction. While we plan to remove the MGUH for 2026 and implement a hybrid system with adjustments to fuel and boost pressure, there is an urgent need for a lighter, more straightforward engine. This is the path forward. Introducing a sole supplier for the gearbox, fuel, and electric hybrid systems is vital. It's a matter of common sense that requires buy-in from the FOM and the teams. We need to present this proposal and gauge their response. Accepting it seems almost logical. Current engine manufacturers appear to be more receptive to the notion of V8 engines. This format was last utilized in F1 in 2013, yet the suggestion of increasing standardizations within power units might provoke disagreement. For instance, implementing a standardized fuel solution could be a strategy to manage costs, particularly since there are concerns that sustainable fuel options might escalate to an exorbitant $300 per liter next year. However, many teams would likely resist abandoning individual suppliers due to existing sponsorship agreements with fuel and oil brands, like Mercedes' partnership with Petronas and Ferrari's with Shell. These brands play an integral role in their operational strategies, making a shift difficult. Early estimates from the FIA indicated that augmenting standard components, or utilizing less expensive materials such as aluminum pistons, could potentially reduce costs by up to 65%. Furthermore, the proposed adjustment in the power distribution between internal combustion engines and batteries, transitioning from a 50-50 split to a 90-10 ratio in the long run, would simplify the kinetic energy recovery systems and lead to smaller battery sizes. Overall, the FIA envisions that the potential for future V8 power units could result in them being around 80 kilograms lighter than the engine set for 2026. Ben Sulayem believes that manufacturers will ultimately recognize the financial benefits of these plans, all while keeping the technology relevant to road cars. He explained, "We spoke about a V10 engine, but how many manufacturers still produce V10s? With a V8 discussion, it's different. We have key players like Ferrari, Mercedes, Audi, and even American companies like GM in the mix. Our objective? To drive down costs. Currently, the engines range between $1.80 and $2.1 million. Just imagine if we could develop engines that are a quarter of that cost and significantly less complicated." Ben Sulayem remains aware that under the current governance framework for power units, any significant changes before 2030 would need the support of a majority of manufacturers. Yet, he expresses a sense of resolve. If the car manufacturers opt against changes that benefit them, the FIA is prepared to wait until the existing regulations conclude to introduce new rules on its own. Discussions are ongoing among the power unit manufacturers, he noted. Ultimately, this is about sharing ideas, ours and theirs. But if this proposal does not gain traction, at least I can say I've made the effort. The FIA will never come out on the losing end here. The current engine setup only incurs higher costs for them, but in a few years, the reality will revert back to the FIA. The goal isn't just about navigating challenges. It's about embracing what makes sense. What's your take on this emerging vision for F1? Do you think shifting to V8 engines with standardized components would enhance the sport? Or are there critical elements being overlooked? Jump into the comments and share your thoughts. Your opinion on this could shape the future of racing. F1 shocker. V8 engines may replace V6 hybrids by 2029, FIA president reveals. Imagine the thunderous roar of a V8 engine ripping through the air at a Formula One race. That's the exciting possibility FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem has teased for as early as 2029, and it's got fans buzzing with anticipation. If you're new to the world of motorsports, Formula One is all about high-speed competition where every detail of the car can make or break a race. An engine type plays a huge role in that thrill. Mohammed Ben Sulayem stepped into the role of FIA president at the end of 2021, and since then, he's been at the center of conversations about shaking up the sport. For years, Formula One enthusiasts have been vocal about their longing to go back to the days of louder, more powerful engines, like the iconic V8S or even the legendary V10S and V12S that defined eras of racing. To put it in perspective, these older engines weren't just about speed. They created an immersive experience with their deafening sounds that made every lap feel epic, drawing in crowds and creating unforgettable moments. Right now, Formula One cars are powered by V6 hybrid engines, which were introduced back in 2014 as a way to incorporate more sustainable technology. But these engines have faced a lot of criticism, mainly because they're significantly quieter than their predecessors. Think about it. The old V10 engines could hit ear-splitting decibels that made your heart pound, while the V6 hybrids focus on efficiency and reduced emissions, which means they produce a more subdued hum. This shift was meant to align with global efforts to make racing greener, but for many fans, it's lost some of that raw excitement that comes from hearing a car scream down the straightaway. But here's where it gets controversial. Earlier this year, Ben Sulayem floated the idea of switching to V10 engines as soon as next season, and it was met with overwhelming support from the fanbase. People were cheering online and at events, reminiscing about the glory days when engines like those in Ayrton Senna's cars dominated. However, the Formula One teams didn't share that enthusiasm at all. In fact, it sparked a heated confrontation in Bahrain, where team leaders pushed back hard, emphasizing their investment in the current rules and how a sudden change could disrupt everything from budgets to strategies. And this is the part most people miss. While fans crave nostalgia, teams are bound by complex regulations that involve massive financial commitments. So any alteration isn't just a tweak. It could mean overhauling entire operations. Fast forward to a recent chat with journalists at the Silverstone circuit, and Ben Sulayem has now shifted his suggestion to a return to V8 engines by 2029. He pointed out how overly complicated the current V6 hybrids are, explaining that they're packed with advanced tech like energy recovery systems, which might sound cool but drive up costs dramatically. For instance, he mentioned that research and development expenses are soaring to around $200 million per team, and each engine can cost between $1.8 million and $2.1 million. In contrast, a simpler V8 engine could cut those figures down, making the sport more commercially viable. To break it down for beginners, R&D in this context is all about the ongoing innovation and testing that teams do to stay competitive, but when costs get this high, it can limit who can even participate, turning F1 into an elite club rather than an open playground for talent. Now, this potential move to V8 engines ties into another big topic buzzing around the F1 paddock: growing the number of teams on the grid. Ben Sulayem has been pushing for an expansion to 12 teams, arguing that simpler engines like the V8 could make it easier for new entrants to join without breaking the bank. For example, we're already seeing fresh faces like Audi, which is set to make its F1 debut next year by taking over the stake F1 team Kick Sauber, and Cadillac, the American giant, planning to hit the track in 2026. These additions could bring new energy and diversity to the sport, but Ben Sulayem is clear that he won't just add a 12th team for show. It has to be the right fit, with solid backing and potential to contribute meaningfully. This approach could democratize F1 a bit, making it more accessible not just for teams but potentially for fans who want to see more variety and competition. All in all, a shift back to V8 engines sounds like a fan favorite that could reignite the passion for Formula One, but it's not without its debates. Some might argue that embracing hybrid tech is crucial for the sport's future in a world focused on sustainability, while others see it as a step backward. What do you think? Would you trade quieter, eco-friendly engines for the sheer thrill of a louder, simpler V8? Or is sticking with hybrids the smarter play for long-term growth? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's get the discussion rolling.